What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another interview edition of Learn Crypto. My name is Nick Hellman, and today we have a special guest with us, Thomas Cox, the former VP of Product for Block.one and current Executive Director of the EOS Alliance. How are you doing today, Tom?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem. I'm excited. You know, EOS has been at the forefront of many debates, conspiracies, but also extreme growth, and that's why I'm excited to have you on here to discuss. You know, a lot of people, including myself, are really up in the air on EOS. And it's nice to have the ability to get your inside opinion on it. So I guess to start, let's just do a brief background on yourself, and then we'll get into this crypto.
Great. So a bit of background on me. Back in 1989, I went to work for Oracle Corporation, big database company. So I have background in technologies from the database side. So I'm very familiar with distributed databases. When I first ran into blockchain and crypto, I thought, oh, big, slow, expensive distributed databases. Why don't I just use Oracle? And after I did Oracle for many years, I was a database architect for about 15 years, shifted over into management, leadership, studying how technology teams work. How do you make a technology team perform well? It was kind of my fascination. I got roped back into doing big software by my old friend and former boss, David Moss, who I will mention by way of illustration. Dave Moss took a handful of guys and an idea and some funding and turned it into Edmunds.com with millions of dollars a month in revenue and 140 employees in 14 months. He is the guy. I'm sure there's many people who could do it, but he's one of the few I know who can take a good idea and some funding and build out a professional software team and deliver functioning code rapidly with very high quality. So when he said he had a project, I'm like, when can I start? We've been friends, but I haven't worked with him in a while. It turns out that when they were putting together the software team in the early days of the ICO, they were looking around for somebody good. And Dan Larimer was impressed enough with Dave Moss to say, I need you on the team. And so the EOS LLC for Block.one, they've got a Hong Kong presence as well. But the EOS LLC, employee number one was Dan Larimer. Employee number two, David Moss. Employee number three was me. And there are, of course, many, many others to follow. And my role inside the company through June was VP of Product. And my focus really was on the governance side and on extracting from Dan Larimer on a weekly basis, or as often as I get to see him, the next new thing that was coming out of his brain. Because you can't really be a VP of product in the traditional sense when you've got a genius product visionary, because he's really actually the product guy. And so I was the interpreter in some senses, and also putting some flesh on the ideas that he had for governance. And governance, by the way, is probably the distinctive feature of the EOS blockchain. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in detail in the course of the interview. So yeah, my background was, enterprise software. For a while there, I mentioned I worked for Oracle. I also worked for a little while at IBM Global Services. So I've been doing, big, medium, and small software projects for many years, and even ran my own company for a while. And I'm very excited. I've been pulled into blockchain. My blockchain journey started in August of 2017, very recent. And I got to say, it is a fascinating space because blockchain technology opens the door to wildly new use cases, and the ecosystems that get created, the communities that get created around public blockchains require you to understand economic theory and game theory and politics and sociology and computer science and cryptography, and nobody knows all that stuff, so you end up having to have teams. So anyway, I think there's some of my background hidden in that rambly little set of digressions I just gave you.
Really, you are the executive director of EOS Alliance. How does EOS Alliance, what is its role, and what is it in the EOS ecosystem?
Yeah, so I mentioned my primary activity at Block.one from August through June was building out governance pieces and trying to put flesh on those bones. And it was clear back in February that that role would end when thing launched, because prior to launch, Block.one's responsible for coming up with default settings for governance that might work out of the box. But once you launch, the community owns governance.
Mm-hmm.
So that role completely changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would either need to find something else to do inside the company, or if I wanted to keep doing, EOS governance, I would, need to transition out. And we agreed that I would transition out at the end of June. So very amicable departure. Still love everybody at Block One. They're wonderful, smart, fundamentally good-hearted people, in a way that apparently is not as rare in crypto as I think people might imagine from what you might read on Reddit. There's actually a lot of very sweet, good-hearted people who want to make a difference in the world.
And they work in this industry out of passion and the belief that they can make a difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's first world countries, third world countries, or just general mass adoption utilization of the technology. And I think you see that with some of the lead guys, even if they butt heads. I know Charles Hoskinson and Dan have worked together and butt heads in the past, but I still think that they have a mutual respect for each other as far as the
and they're clearly aiming for the same positive outcomes for humanity. And I think that is a nice thing to have in an industry. And I look forward to the day when we start delivering on that hopeful promise more and more realistically. I think EOS is a big step in that direction. So you asked about the Alliance. It was clear, even from the launch days and soon after we launched, that the community didn't have, as any decentralized community, if it's truly decentralized, you barely know each other and it's very hard to coordinate anything, right? If you want to really have good coordination and good communication, you centralize and you structure and you have hierarchy. But when you don't have any of those things, you got a bunch of people milling around going, so what are we going to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? That sounds stupid, and then you yell and point fingers and shout at each other on Reddit or in Telegram. And a bunch of the big holders and sort of interested people had tried there have been several attempts to make an alliance or foundation-like entity, both before, during, and after the launch. And the first three really didn't amount to anything. They didn't quite gel. And so the EOS Alliance was the fourth attempt, was Brock Pierce and Gali Benazzi of Bancor. There's a billionaire named Nick Snoledo who's on the board, a bunch of other folks, and a whole bunch of big holders who don't want their name known and I haven't been told who they are. I'm just informed that they're on our side. Got together and contributed some money and said, we're going to come up with this entity whose role will be to help this decentralized community talk to itself, that you need a focal point. And we don't need any power because all the power is already clearly distributed through the code and the Constitution and all the other governance elements, which I helped design. I know what they are. But an alliance type entity would be available to do things like, let's have a weekly phone call on this burning topic. And let's have some of our staff and volunteers invite in the loud voices to have a structured conversation and then publish the result of that conversation and then reflect on the published conversation and then have another conversation the next week and then building towards something and translate those from English into Chinese, or have the Mandarin verbal conversation turned into written Chinese and then translated into English and Korean or Russian. So we're having now 4 different languages every week. We're hosting a phone call on, specifically right now, the Constitution. And the questions are, what do we like and not like about the current interim Constitution? Do we want to, just ratify it and then edit it and change it over time? Or do we want to replace it completely with a new one? If so, which? Is it Dan Lerner's version 2? Is it the version 3 that EOS Amsterdam helped to craft? Is it the one that the Koreans just wrote? And so having this sort of weekly rhythm gives a kind of structure, and the Alliance does that. We have a $1 million budget for the year. I've got 2 staff plus me, some contractors, a whole bunch of volunteers who are absolutely priceless. And what we're doing is saying, hey, what is the community wanting to talk about? How do we facilitate the conversation? If you ever work with a good facilitator, you have no idea what their personal opinion is because they're helping you figure out what your opinion is.
Exactly.
And they're helping the room figure out what does the room think and what conclusions can we draw, if any, and what direction do we want to move in. So I'm very pleased with the work we've done so far with the Alliance. It's been, we launched in August to a chorus of, it's centralization, you're grabbing power, all kinds of nonsense like that. It's in our charter statement that we will neither seek nor accept any positional power in the governance of the chain. All we will do is help the community communicate internally with itself and be a focal point. And you can't just say, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Actions speak louder than words in crypto as everywhere else. So we just got into it and started hosting conversations.
Yeah.
And hosting conversations.
Would it be safe to say that you guys really are just, almost like a foundation? You're kind of the outreach team.
We were going to be called the EOS Foundation, but someone took the name in the United States, or some ecologically minded entity in like Seattle that already, they're not even using the name very much, but it's already taken. So we fought over names and ended up with Alliance.
There you go.
It's imperfect. We would have preferred EOS Foundation, but it was not available.
Interesting. So, we kind of heard a little bit about yourself and EOS Alliance. Some people that are watching, I'm sure a lot of people do already know what EOS is. Could you give just a brief overview of what EOS is, what sector it really falls into this ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Potential new investors or new users out there. This is your chance to shill your project.
Well, I actually, it's interesting. A lot of folks will want to shill. I don't. I want people to pick the thing that works right for them, whatever that means. And I don't think anybody on the planet is investing in crypto. I think they're all speculating.
Exactly.
I don't think it's my role or in my interest to, encourage people to speculate on EOS or to pump the price up or take it down or take it sideways or anything. What I can tell you is if you want to build smart contract-based distributed applications, you may find that the EOS platform is a pretty compelling one. It was designed by Dan Larimer to be the platform that he wished he had when he wanted to build distributed applications. He couldn't find anything. So after I would call his prior two products, BitShares and Steam, to be either artists' drafts of the final masterpiece or detailed explorations of specific subsets of the technology that got turned into EOS.
Yeah, and I've heard him talk about those. I kind of see them as working products that didn't really live up to all the applications that he was really striving for. And then he kind of came up with the EOS idea and got Block.1 and others to support the development of the EOS.
Yeah, absolutely. So the design goal for EOS was to be a fast, flexible place to write general purpose smart contracts, and to be an ecosystem where the intent of code is law rather than the code is law. Because if you want code is law, there's plenty of places you can go for that today. You don't need another platform. The downside of code is law, as I think most people know, especially if you put money into, say, a parity wallet or you've been hacked or something, is that any bug, there are no bugs in those platforms because whatever happens is correct. And if you didn't like it, you should have read the code, like anybody does that. So, if you want to actually build businesses on a blockchain, on a public mainnet, you'd better have the ability to recover from bugs and flaws and mistakes. And you can't recover by rolling back the chain, because then you've just destroyed the entire chain and all the other, bystanders get crushed. So what do? And the answer is you have a way to pause a particular contract or a particular account through a mechanism that involves a certain amount of humans, people, judgment. And we engaged a bunch of lawyers, including Norton Rose Fulbright. If you ever look up Norton Rose Fulbright and search on that name plus governed blockchain, you will find the paper that informed a lot of our thinking, that helped us get really clear that if you want the intent of code to be law, which allows you to recover from flawed code and return to the intention, you need Ricardian contracts. And Ricardian contracts are simultaneously human and machine readable. And we've got it set up so that when you write a smart contract, you write a matching Ricardian contract so that action for action and variable for variable, they match. We even have a thing that'll take a smart contract and spit out a stub Ricardian for you. And you say, so the intention of this thing is to blank. And here's why you care about that. Let's say you had an EOS version of the parity wallet. And then let's say you had the parity wallet bug hit where $300 million worth of your favorite cryptocurrency were suddenly destroyed. But of course, by destroyed, we mean sitting there taunting you and you can't get it out. Well, if you're on Ethereum, you're screwed. If you're on EOS, you raise your hand and say, excuse me, we say here in our contract that our arbitration forum is whoever you've named. You go to that arbitrator and file a case and say, this is not the intention. At no point did we say destroy our money. Mm-hmm. Like, you check my code. I did not say, there's no action here that says destroy my money. Now, there's burn contracts that are supposed to destroy money. That'd be fine, but this isn't that. This is a wallet. It's supposed to hold money, not destroy money. So and they go, okay, well, let's check. And they charge you a fee, and they'd examine the Ricardian contract and the code, and maybe interview you and some other people. And everyone involved is going to say, they'll swear on a stack of Bibles, no, we did not intend to destroy our money. And at some point, the arbitrator is going to say, okay, because you named me as your arbitrator in this contract, I'm empowered to have an opinion on the contract. And you filed a case, which then means I'm allowed to have a meaningful opinion about the contract. And so as your arbitrator, I find that you're correct, that this executed in a way that's different from the intention of the code. And so I instruct the block producers to enter a new transaction that pulls these funds out of the broken wallet back into your account. And it's like a correcting transaction in double entry bookkeeping. You don't go back and change the books from last year because they get really grumpy with you when you do that. The books are closed from last year. Mm-hmm. What you do is you put in something called a correcting entry, where you say, yeah, we said this before, but now it's this. And that's a new record, and it's equally immutable as the other stuff, but it moves money that could not otherwise be moved. So it's a superpower. It requires 15 of the 21 block producers to sign it. If they ever sign anything that didn't come from an arbitrator who was empowered to come up with a finding, they would be in violation of their block producer agreement, and they could be fired, fined, taken to the woodshed, what have you. So it's fairly intricately involved here. I occasionally run into people who say, oh, arbitrators can do arbitrary things. It's like, no, an arbitrator can rule on a case that's brought to them where it involves a contract that named that arbitrator in advance, and they can only come up with a ruling about that transaction, about that contract that involves you and the other parties to the dispute. And then whatever the finding is can only modify the things that were touched in the transaction originally.
And then it still has to be voted through by the block.
And it's still got to be voted through. And there's, one of our standards is that unless it's something super urgent, it sits there for 30 days for examination before it rolls forward, which gives people a chance to double check and say, hey, wait, that's corrupt. This person took a bribe, off with his head or whatever.
Well, that kind of skips me ahead to one of my questions. Previously there were 7 EOS accounts that were frozen.
It's a lot more than that now.
Yeah, I think that's a fine line between blockchain immutability and really the procedures needed for mass adoption and utilization that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Do you think this crossed the line, and why were those particular accounts locked down? And you really kind of already got into that. You kind of already answered that question.
Yeah, there's not a single case where any account has been frozen where there was not first, number one, an identifiable human being who brought a case to an arbitrator. Number two, they had to provide evidence of their own identity, including a video deposition, copies of their government identity, and proof that they were owners of whatever assets they're talking about, and so on, and posting a performance bond in case they were lying anyway. So I'll tell you, Nick, if somebody managed to freeze your account by lying to somebody, they did it after they gave a video deposition, which you get to see a copy of. They provided government ID, went through some sort of KYC process to prove that it's real ID, and they posted 20% of the value. So as soon as you go, hey, wait, this guy's a lying pig, this is my account, I own it fair and square, then they'd unfreeze it, and you'd have a cause of action against that person, and they've already put down a deposit that you could totally collect. So you just got a 20% bonus on whatever money was temporarily frozen. Plus you can go after him for all kinds of damages, and he's identifiable.
Yeah.
So this is really I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's not a bad system, and it's going to get better with time.
Yeah, this is really interesting because you've heard, like I said, there's a lot of discrepancies in what you hear, the FUD, Twitter, Telegram, a lot of noise in
Well,
this.
there are people who have a vested interest in believing the worst, whether it's clickbait writers or people who, think Bitcoin is the beginning and ending of all things or what have you. And that's fine. By their works shall you know them. If nothing I've said is in any way new, it's all that information I've just given you has been available publicly for months to anybody who has, had the slightest interest in finding out. Mm-hmm. So if this is the first time you've heard it, I would have you, check your sources and maybe find better sources.
Yeah, it's getting through all the noise, I think, and really hearing it from somebody higher up within each of these organizations and these cryptocurrencies. That's why I like to have the interviews with founders, et cetera, really to get the details. And some people, well, they're a little biased. Well, the guy's willing to come on here, show his face, show his name, show his role. So
and I'll point you, I'll point you to the websites. I'll introduce you to the people involved. I'll show you the Telegram traffic. I'll take it to the mat to give you the details. So
that's why I like to hear the information straight from the source. And this kind of goes to, you said that 15 of the 21 block producers do have to vote on any of these arbitrations.
They have to actually sign a transaction implementing the order they received. And if they withhold their signature, they have to give a reason. And that actually happened at one point. We had EOS New York, I thought very courageously, refused to sign something because they were not happy with, this was back in the very, very early days before we even had on-chain messaging. I mean, we launched, I will freely admit, and I blame myself in part for this, we launched with a lot of our governance tools missing or unfinished. And one of those was on-chain messaging. Now, we found some ways to do on-chain messaging so you can cryptographically prove that account thus and such sent you that message, and they reference in their message a PDF file at a certain URL with a certain hash, and then you can go get that file, check the hash, and go, yeah, okay, I got chain of custody here. This person is saying this thing. And then, okay, now you're in communication with an arbitrator and not an imposter. But before that secure communication method was worked out, at one point EOS New York said very correctly, we don't trust this order. We don't see a chain of custody here, which forced the maturation of the process, which is perfect. And we have now a very good process, I think. And so anytime you, as a block producer, you do or refrain from doing a thing, you have to give your reasons why, and you're accountable pretty quickly. You get a reputation. I dropped EOS New York's name because I think they have the top reputation of any block producer, and that's saying something. We have some amazing block producers. EOS Canada does incredible work. EOS Sweden, I think, is technically among the best. EOS DAC, EOS Rio. I could name probably 10 or 15 that I think are just phenomenal. And now they're not all in the top 21 for a variety of reasons. We could talk about that. But I think they're all at least on standby. And people respect them because they have made themselves identifiable. You know where to find them, who they are. We have a system on chain called Reg Producer, where you register to become a maybe, hey, you can vote for me now that I've registered. And if I get enough votes, I am automatically in the top 21. And now I get to make blocks and not just validate them. And our block producers have been the only ones who are simultaneously identifiable and paid by the chain. So it makes them everyone looks to them as a sort of a source of authority. Mm-hmm. And I think we maybe over-relied on them a bit because there's things that I think that the community needs to do through voting rather than having the block producers do all that. They can't set policy. It's not their job. Now I'm hinting at the next thing I wanted to mention, which is referendum. Okay. The way EOS is run is through token-weighted voting. So the more tokens you have, the more power your vote has. So if I have 100 tokens, I vote yes, and you have 200 tokens and you vote no, it's 200 no to my 100 yes. And somebody else can come along with more tokens. And that way, if you were to split your account up into 10 accounts, well, you just had to split your tokens up too. And you have to stake the tokens to vote them, which prevents you from voting them, transferring them, voting them, transferring them, voting them, and trying to, fake out the system and have your votes count twice. Unstaking takes 3 days.
Now, what is the benefit of staking besides voting? I know staking in terms on other networks is like proof of stake, where you earn an ROI percentage based on locking up your coins and like verifying the network.
Right.
What does it mean for staking with the EOS platform?
So you stake in order to receive a share, your share, your proportional share of CPU bandwidth and network bandwidth. And you can also use some tokens to purchase RAM. And the difference, of course, is that CPU and network bandwidth are both continually replenished. Even if you use it all right now, in another second, there's some more, because it's always being, you use it ephemerally. RAM, when you use it, it stays used until you empty it and release it. So it has to use a slightly different mechanism. So setting aside the purchase, when you purchase RAM, you give up that token. And if you sell the RAM back into the system, you get some tokens back. And if the price happens to fluctuate, you might get back a different amount than you paid. But for CPU and network bandwidth, you still own them, but you stake them, which is the 3-day lockup. And it stays locked until you say unstake. You immediately lose access to the CPU and bandwidth and network bandwidth. And then 3 days later, your tokens are liquid again. You can transfer them around. One of the ways we find that people discover they've been hacked is their staked tokens are suddenly have been ordered to be unstaked. And they're like, I didn't order those unstaked. What's going on here? And then you've got 72 hours to figure that one out before they're liquid. And if it is in fact being stolen, then they get, they get transferred off somewhere and you never see them again. And that 3-day unstake period has been used to catch a lot of in-process thefts and stop them.
That's an interesting opportunity there. You got your 3 days to figure it out, change your passwords, over whatever it may be, to try to protect the funds that your hard-working money went into EOS and staking with it, voting with it, etc. So.
Yeah, and that's just one of those nice features of the staking process. Now, rather than staking for direct return, what you're staking is to get CPU and network bandwidth, and also the right to vote for block producers and to vote for other things. Now that the referendum contract has been written and is being tested, we'll be able to actually poll token holders directly and ask them to make certain policy decisions and set the direction of the chain. Now, that could be called on-chain governance or not. I think it's not the same kind of on-chain governance people think of when they come from the Ethereum world. See, here's the reason. If you did on-chain governance in Ethereum, you would write a piece of code that if it got voted in, that code would begin to be executed. If there's a bug in that code, you can just completely destroy your chain. The thing could lock up tighter than a drum and you'd never get it unlocked without some sort of hard fork. That's
kind of what happened with the Ethereum Classic, Ethereum original hard fork that happened there. And everything else.
Well, that was a deliberate fork, but yes, there was the DAO was code that wasn't performing as desired by some people. It was running the way it was written.
Yeah, exactly.
Arguably, it was doing exactly what it was written to do. It was written with a bug, and someone exploited the bug, the feature. Hey, I can drain this thing with a reentry call. Look at that.
Yep.
Okay, well, if code is law, then he just won.
Yep.
So whatever. We can argue all day on whether that was, how is that immutable? How is that, code is law? The difference between, I think, the Ethereum, forking to roll back the DAO hack and something like EOS is, rather than doing it very, very rarely when Vitalik says yes, we do it as a matter of routine, but through a clear, transparent, documented, repeatable process using trained professionals who follow the rules of dispute resolution. Which, by the way, our arbitrators follow a process that is codified in something called UNCITRAL, UNCITRAL, which is the United Nations rule set for arbitrating international trade disputes. So this is decades old, standard, normal, boring arbitration.
And sticking to the regulatory compliance.
It is legally enforceable in over 150 countries around the world.
There you go.
So the one place we didn't do really bleeding edge, cutting edge, novel stuff was dispute resolution. We went to old, tried and true. And if you want to know more, go to the Norton Rose Fulbright paper I mentioned to start with.
Perfect.
So you asked what sector we're in. I'm going to back up and pick up that thread. The sector I see the EOS blockchain being in is sort of the post-Ethereum, okay, here's what Ethereum can do as a second generation blockchain. It can do smart contracts, but code is law. It's ungoverned. What if we had a governed blockchain that was still public, but we allowed the rule that intent of code is law rather than just the written code is law? How would that make things better, worse, different? How do we make that happen? And so there's some design trade-offs that were made. One of them was to have 21 block producers instead of 100 or thousands or what have you, to use delegated proof of stake rather than mere proof of stake, rather than proof of work. And that is arguably more quote unquote centralized, unless you look at mining pools, in which case Ethereum and Bitcoin are more centralized because, we've got 21 versus 3 mining pools controlling the vast majority of, hash power on those chains. So, pick your poison. I will say that it seems to be working reasonably well. I don't think that the EOS blockchain might stand up to the kind of concerted external attack that a Bitcoin would be able to stand up to. But then Bitcoin would be attacked by, sovereign nations that want to protect their fiat currency. Whereas, EOS isn't trying to be an alternative gold, an alternative currency. It's trying to be a platform to run dApps on. Which I think is not going to attract the same kind of animosity or attack. And if it does, I guess we'll see what happens. But it seems to me implausible, unlikely. It's a different use case. If you want that kind of resistance to governments, well, Bitcoin is there for you. And to some extent, Ethereum as well. So by going to 21 block producers who are voted in, we are counting on the plutocrats, the big wallets, if you will, to have enough enlightened self-interest to replace any that look corrupt. And we just a few weeks ago found evidence of what looks like maybe a cartel of a minority of block producers who are maybe swapping votes with each other, which may or may not be illegal, and possibly buying votes, which is against the rules of the chain. But all that means is someone can then file a dispute with an arbitrator. Arbitrators have the power to issue subpoenas. No one's filed the case that I'm aware of, and certainly I haven't heard of any subpoenas going out. So, that particular allegation of corruption is not played out yet.
I was going to bring that up. With the criticisms of EOS being too centralized or whatnot, and then the fact that you said you guys are trying to do an on-chain governance, I thought that may be important because there was rumors floating around of collusion among the 21 block producers. Not all of them, of course, but large wallets voting for each other, maybe buying votes. So if you had an opinion or what you guys think.
When that came out, the EOS Alliance, which I'm the executive director, issued a formal statement saying, we have mechanisms for addressing this kind of allegation. And if it turns out to be true, we have mechanisms for addressing it when it's true. Let's use the mechanisms that are here. And that is arbitration, fact-finding. If an arbitrator finds that someone has in fact violated the rules, they can order them to give back what they stole. Because if you take money under false pretenses, it's called theft through fraud. We've got some registered block producers who are collecting vote pay. They're not making blocks, but they've got enough votes to get standby pay. That's how you guarantee a pool of standby machines as you pay for them. Mm-hmm. And these accounts have not complied. They visibly have not complied with the provisions of the reg producer Ricardian contract, but they're managing to execute the pay me command every day. Now, again, that's not a flaw in the software so much as it is an opportunity in the governance system for someone to raise their hand and say, hey, this guy's pulling in money he doesn't deserve. I would like it stopped, please. But constitutions do not enforce themselves. There's no law that is self-enforcing. You have to ask for enforcement in our system. It's a commercial law system. It's contract law. You're a party to this contract called the Constitution. You want something to change, you have to ask. And again, no one has filed that claim yet.
Do you think that nobody's filed a claim because the collusion may run deeper than?
No, clearly not. The people I've talked to who say, well, someone should do something. And I explain to them, well, what you do is you file a case. Then they look at their shoes and mumble. It's like, okay, so put up or shut up. And clearly there's not enough money being stolen to matter enough. The people who are most likely bothered by it are block producers who are, don't want to risk getting voted out by an angry cabal who don't want to be held accountable. What we need are whistleblowers and other deep wallets to come after them. And I've talked to a few people who have who claim to have large holdings. I believe that they do. And they said that they're waiting for things to play out. They're not in any rush. So, things didn't get resolved between, Thursday and Friday. Does that mean we're doomed? No, it means we have a slower tempo for certain kinds of problem resolutions. So we'll see. My belief, and I haven't put any money on a prediction market to say this, so take that at face value, is that, at some point somebody will get sick of this and file a case, and one of three things can happen. Number one is the person who's brought up on charges stops doing it immediately and either, runs away and vanishes from the chain, and maybe they come back under a different ID, but the behavior stops and everyone's going to go, oh, look, that was quick. And then they'll be a lot quicker to file against the next malefactor. Number two is they respond and deny everything, in which case it'll play out. Remember that arbitrators can issue subpoenas. Now, what's interesting is you can ignore a subpoena, but if you ignore an arbitrator's subpoena, the arbitrator is allowed under the UN rules to draw legally enforceable inferences from the failure to disclose. He gets to assume now that the document you didn't share must favor the other side if you had found it and shared it. And so you better be very careful what subpoenas you ignore. And then the worst case, the third case, is that there's enough corruption that the block producers will simply, there's enough block producers who are infected with collusion that they will refuse to carry out the arbitrator's order once it comes, and we can't get to 15 signatures. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a very interesting failure case for DPOS, and the solution is very clear, and everyone knows it. If they know anything about DPOS, is you fork. You zero out the wallets of everybody who voted for those block producers that are refusing to do the thing they've just been told to do because they're violating the Constitution, they're violating their obligations as block producers when they refuse to carry out a lawful order. And all of a sudden, these great big dangerous swaggering wallets that are throwing their weight around and corrupting the chain just got dropped to zero.
They're broke.
They're broke. They're on some fork with nobody else on it, and Charles Hoskinson of Cardano talks about this exact failure case when it comes to his chain, and that's exactly the response that he recommends, and it's the same response everybody else recommends about DPOS chains. Is if it gets bad enough, you fork out the bad guys, and no one wants to do that unless they have to, and you can. And I've actually recommended to some of the block producers who I am confident are virtuous that they should practice that forking routine. They should rehearse it and get it down to less than 3 days, so that if you found that in fact you had come to that undesirable place where the corruption is bad enough to harm the proper functioning of governance, you can take action faster than they can unstake, which means you can zero out their wallet before they can run off to an exchange and exchange it and hide their money. And I think that just the fact that you're practicing it is not unlike holding war games off the coast of an enemy country. It's like, we're not doing anything to you. We're just demonstrating our ability to do things to you.
Yeah.
And that, again, tends to make people straighten up and fly right. We'll see. right now, reason we're getting bad behavior is because no one's yet seen negative consequences for this bad behavior.
I think
I'm
right now it's
surprised.
just more of a gray area. People, maybe they fear, like you said, if the collusion runs deep enough, maybe they don't know who's colluding and they don't want to be voted out. They don't want to lose their block producer title or their space in the standby. And I think the best
Yeah, you
thing.
can't expect block producers to carry 100% of the weight of bringing justice to the chain. You've got to file your suit. You got to take it to the arbitrators. You got to get an arbitrator ruling, which will follow only after an arbitrator does investigation and discovery and questioning both sides and letting them question each other's evidence and all that kind of due process. And it's, people, well, that doesn't scale. It's like, well, how many collusion cases do you have?
Mm-hmm.
We have one. How much scaling do you need? By the way, when people talk about scaling and arbitration, this is a side note, but it is one of the uninformed criticisms I hear, is that, well, if you try to have arbitration for disputes, it doesn't scale because it's, there's humans involved. Well, yes and no. We have the Alliance the EOS Alliance has pulled together a working group on dispute resolution and arbitration, headed by Amy Wan, who is from SageWise, and they do smart contracts on Ethereum, as well as I believe they're porting now to EOS. They're very interested in EOS. And they do an arbitration marketplace. And one of their advisors is a guy named Colin Rule. And Colin Rule was the head of dispute resolution for eBay PayPal. And they automated dispute resolution so that 90 to 95% of arbitratable disputes are resolved with a bot. It scales, man, but it scales after you explore the space and see the patterns so you can code to it. But you can't code to something until you've examined it. It's too early for that. So please don't tell me arbitration doesn't scale. I have proof it does.
There you
Anyways,
go.
So let's squash that thought.
Taking a few steps back, we've kind of dove deep here, gone on more high-level conversations. Let's go to something that people ask. It's a pretty simple question. What is the reasoning behind the one-year token sale? And do you feel it helped with decentralization, or what was the purposes of it? Even though some people argue that, well, if you look at the rich list, maybe that one-year-long sale didn't really help with decentralization at all.
Well, when the one-year ICO was locked into an ERC-20 contract that went live, in May or June of 2017. And so I promise you, any knowledge that came to light after that went live cannot be, retroactively applied to the contract. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what was the state of ICOs in the summer of 2017? And the answer to that is they were very short. They were massively favored insiders. And if you were a normal person with a couple of bucks and you wanted to participate, you were frozen out. There were, secret pre-mining, there was, private sales. And by the time you got a chance to have a taste, well, it was just too late. And that is extremely elitist, and it doesn't give people a chance to participate if they want to. And I know Dan Larimer reasonably well, and we talked about this briefly. And what I took away from talking to him, and I think you'll find this in one of the white papers or one of his articles, is if you have a long enough sale, people have a chance to know that there's a sale going on and get involved. Yeah. And so it was set up, if you look at the details of the code, you'll find that it was set up to be as equitable as possible. So it was a 23-hour bidding period, which means that the end of the period isn't like midnight in your jurisdiction every single time. It rotates around the clock. So at least some of the week you can get in there and it's closing when you're awake. And there's a fixed number of tokens, 2 million tokens every 23 hours. And however much ETH went in, it would get prorated, and your price had to do with how many people put in money that period. So you could, put money in advance and put, 20 ETH, if you had that much, into, 1 ETH into each of 20 different windows, and, at cost average.
Trying to get the dollar cost average down. And
yeah, if you wanted to, or you could, try to time it or whatever. And in the price fluctuated on a weekly, but not so much a daily basis, as I recall. In any event, the thinking it was to make it as available to as many people as possible, not assuming that rich people wouldn't buy more. That's kind of stupid to imagine that rich people aren't going to buy more of a desirable thing. I'd like to please give me an example where that's true. What we do want to do is give other people the time and opportunity to participate if they wanted to. And it's been a wild success by that measure. There's 300,000 accounts with at least some tokens. I think that's pretty broad distribution. And the Pareto rule tells you that 80% of tokens will be held by 20% of accounts, and that 50% will be held by 5% or 2%. And that's about correct. I think the top 100 or 200 wallets hold the majority stake. And that's true of every other asset distribution on the planet, crypto and non-crypto. So no, we didn't break the, I'm spacing the name of the Italian guy who discovered the distribution. I can't believe I'm forgetting the word. I must be getting old.
Getting there. Getting
Pareto.
gray.
Is it Pareto? Yeah, the Pareto principle. Okay, 80-20 rule, right? Guess what? It still holds true. Shock. Gravity is still working.
Yep.
Okay, there's still oxygen in the air. It's amazing, right? So, yeah, the year-long token sale was there to increase availability for people who wanted to get in, and I think it did that. If people thought it was going to prevent the accumulation of large reserves, well, I don't know how one could do that, and it didn't do that. I don't think it was designed to do that, so what? Let's see, you mentioned the token sale. We talked a little bit about RAM, CPU, and network. The RAM marketplace was a bit of a hot thing for a while until they figured out how to gradually increase the RAM supply, and then the RAM speculation went away. And so, for a little while, it cost like $7 or $17 to open a new account on EOS, and now it's back to like $1.
Yeah. That was kind of a concern too with the developmental cost, like how much it costs for developers. There was the concern of whether some dApps were going to, choose to develop elsewhere or have to close down their dApp because they're not drawing in the revenue to intake pay.
To afford the tokens. And another new thing is token leasing is now a thing. So if you need access to tokens and can't afford them, you can borrow them. You can lease them. And then if you go in with enough, and then if you need more, you can lease them for, a chunk of time, and maybe your revenue is enough, you can start to acquire them, or you just keep renting them, who knows. So the market is getting more sophisticated, and the people who are popular and have some kind of business model that involves revenue are finding ways to get their needs met, which is good.
And really, you kind of discussed this, but if you were to kind of sum it up in a few sentences, what will EOS bring to the cryptocurrency space and industry that isn't provided by the other platforms, whether it's Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Neo, the list goes on and on for some of these protocol platforms. What does EOS bring to the space that isn't there already?
Well, I would have to be an expert on every other chain to know that. I'll tell you what I think it is. It is, number one, a third generation, not a second generation chain. It is public yet permissioned. It is governed. So it's got the ability to run very fast. I don't believe the peak speed of 4,000 transactions per second. I think that's a measurement artifact. I think accurately, sustainably, it's 1,500 transactions per second. It might be more than that, but that's what I believe. So it's got speed that a lot of others don't. It's got a robust governance system that's still having its kinks worked out, but that if you had the parity wallet on EOS, you wouldn't be looking at $300 million lost forever. You'd be looking at an arbitration case and the return of your money. You have the ability, therefore, to, at least in theory, we'll see what happens, I believe, to launch distributed applications with a global reach, where you're not dependent on bug-free code, where one bug is bankruptcy. And I don't know of anybody else that's got that. I hope they all get it. I would love to see the entire world, move on to whatever a fourth generation blockchain looks like, and fifth and sixth. I mean, I'm looking for the long play for humanity here. But I will say in the short term, EOS seems to have moved the ball forward on a number of fronts much more rapidly than some of the folks who said they were doing similar things. We've got, WASM-based virtual machine. You don't have to learn a brand new language. You can write it in C++ or eventually Rust or several other languages. If it compiles to WASM, you're good. The WASM standard is a global standard. It's used outside as well as inside blockchains. We've got, I think, everyone loves their community. Oh, we have the best community. Well, I would say the EOS community is pretty bloody awesome. They really collaborate and cooperate to an extent you don't see many other places. I think the Ethereum community is very cooperative as well. I'm pretty impressed with them. And I hear good things about a few of the other smart contract platforms, but the Bitcoiners are all yelling and pointing and, in part, I think because, the Bitcoin universe is a win-lose universe, and the EOS and maybe to some extent the Ethereum universes are win-win universes. Right? You can actually create value and not just exchange it. So to me, the EOS space is a space where you can go as someone who doesn't yet know much about smart contracts or distributed applications and receive the community support as well as the software support to maybe create a world-changing distributed application. We'll see what happens. Give it 6 months and we'll check in with each other and we'll find out how it's going.
Perfect. Sounds good. And, one of the last things is, what is your overall opinion on the crypto ecosystem as a whole right now? We've talked a lot about EOS. We've gotten the weeds on EOS, the good, the bad, the ugly. What do you think about the crypto ecosystem, blockchain technology, and, the price speculation that's going on right now as well? We all know we went from 20,000 down to 6,000. You can really start to see which teams are digging in and continue to develop through the hard times. What do you think the outcome is for all of us here? I once heard told as true to me a story that the head of the Federal Reserve was stepping down. He said, and I'll quote him and I'll give you the same thing. If you ask me to predict, in his case, the future of interest rates, in my case, the future of cryptocurrency, he said the price will fluctuate. That's my prediction. I think cryptocurrencies are a fascinating thing. It may take us another 10 years to figure out what on earth they really mean for the other human institutions that rev up against them. I'm excited as heck at the opportunity to take the incredibly insecure technologies of the internet and start to build in some of the potential for high security that we see pioneered by Bitcoin and these other blockchains. And to do that, we're going to have to ask our developers to stop imagining that history began the day they started working in crypto. We need to learn the lessons of history. Find somebody who's worked on one of the older protocols and take them to lunch and learn some things about, the challenges and trade-offs that they faced when they were building their stuff. I see blockchain as being a potentially life-changing technology for all of us. It's overhyped and underhyped simultaneously. And that is hard to achieve, but we've achieved it. That's my takeaway. There you go, guys. Is there any last things that we may have missed pertaining to this conversation? I think we kind of touched base on all the topics we wanted to.
I would encourage people, if they're interested to learn more about the EOS software, EOS.io website is one good place to start. The EOS Alliance is at EOSalliance.io. It's a very welcoming community. I would avoid Reddit just because it's Reddit. Sorry, couldn't resist that. We're more of a Telegram group as far as I'm concerned. And if you're in China, of course, you're going to end up on WeChat instead. But we've got a very large and I think very welcoming community. And I would love to see even more people get involved and learn how they can put the power of blockchain to work to solve whatever problems they've got.
Yeah, and I'll try to provide all of those links in the description below. If you guys are interested in EOS or want to learn more, check them out.
Highly recommend the Circle research analysis. I haven't seen a lot of independent research papers done that try to describe the EOS situation. I'm not into crypto speculating, so I don't follow that very much, but I have run into this. It's circle.com. Under research, they have an EOS page. I've read it fairly closely and I couldn't find anything factually wrong, and that is very rare. So I would say as an overview, an independent overview, it's not a bad choice. I assume it's independent for all I know, but maybe they're highly leveraged and all in on EOS, and that they're, who knows, you have to ask them that. But as an overview, it seems and feels very balanced to me, and it's independent. So
there we go. So take a look for that in the description as well, guys. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you know where to throw them down in the comment section, and either myself or maybe Thomas will take a look, or maybe somebody else from EOS as well, to try to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, Nick, if you get questions, ping me and let me know.
Sounds good. I think EOS is a very interesting cryptocurrency, a very interesting platform. It was nice to get your insight. My opinion on this has become a little bit more clear, obviously, like I said, with all the noise going on and all the various platforms. And it's one that I definitely need to get more involved with, as far as utilizing my account to capture more airdrops, to get involved with some more new dApps that are being built on top of EOS, and really start utilizing the network. Because I really think that network utilization really drives price appreciation and a value for that network. And I think EOS is in a good position to start getting that network utilization with everything that's going on over there. So until next time, guys, stay tuned for your daily updates on cryptocurrencies right here at Learn Crypto. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Nick. Take care.